Have you ever heard the king of rock and roll sound like he'd rather be anywhere else? Did Elvis Presley, the hip-swiveling heart-throb sensation who changed music forever, occasionally phone it in? Elvis Presley recorded hundreds of songs throughout his legendary career, from the raw energy of his Sun Records days to his final sessions in the Jungle Room at Graceland. With such a massive catalog, it's not surprising that not every take captured Elvis at his passionate best. Sometimes, whether due to exhaustion, frustration with material he didn't connect with, or the grueling pace of his recording schedule, the King's enthusiasm audibly waned. These moments when Elvis sounded disinterested offer a fascinating glimpse into the human behind the legend, a man who, despite his supernatural talent and charisma, sometimes struggled with the demands of his career and the expectations placed upon him. For devoted fans who've studied every note of his vast discography, these instances stand out as curious anomalies in an otherwise electrifying body of work. Number 5. Old MacDonald, from the Double Trouble soundtrack, 1967. The late 1960s were not the brightest period in Elvis Presley's career. While the British invasion and psychedelic rock were revolutionizing popular music, Elvis was stuck in Hollywood churning out formulaic movies with increasingly questionable soundtracks. Perhaps no recording better exemplifies Elvis's creative frustration during this period than his rendition of Old MacDonald for the 1967 film Double Trouble. Yes, the king of rock and roll, the same man who scandalized America with his provocative performances of Hound Dog and Heartbreak Hotel, found himself recording a children's nursery rhyme for a movie soundtrack. His vocal delivery tells the whole story. From the opening notes, Elvis sounds utterly detached from the material. His voice, normally so rich with emotion and swagger, comes across flat and mechanical as he recites the familiar lyrics about farm animals. The backing track, with its cheery arrangement and light-hearted approach, only emphasizes how disconnected Elvis seems from the performance. During the recording session at Radio Resorters in Hollywood on June 28, 1966, witnesses reported that Elvis seemed visibly frustrated with the material. According to Elvis's longtime friend and Memphis Mafia member Lamar Fike, Elvis looked at the sheet music and just shook his head. He knew it was beneath him, but he was contractually obligated to record it. The most telling moment comes during the song's middle section, where Elvis is required to make animal noises. His half-hearted oink oink and quack quack sound like they're being performed under duress by a man wondering how his career had arrived at this point. There's a palpable sense that the same vocalist who had electrified the world with "That's All Right, Mama" just 13 years earlier was now going through the motions. Music historian Peter Guralnick noted in his comprehensive Elvis biography, Careless Love, that this period represented the nadir of Elvis's recording career, when the artist seemed to have surrendered any meaningful artistic control over his musical output. Old MacDonald stands as perhaps the most egregious example of this creative valley. Yet even in his boredom, there's something fascinating about hearing Elvis's distinctive voice tackle such inappropriate material. The very disconnect between the singer and the song creates an almost surreal listening experience that has made this track a curiosity among collectors and fans studying the full arc of the King's career. Number 4. Stay Away from Elvis Is Back. 1960. After his 2-year military service in Germany, Elvis returned to civilian life in 1960 and headed straight to RCA's Studio B in Nashville for an eagerly anticipated recording session. The resulting album, Elvis Is Back, is widely considered one of his finest works, touting a more mature artist exploring diverse musical styles from blues to pop to gospel. but buried among the album's stellar tracks like Such a Night and Fever is Stay Away, a song where Elvis's usual engagement seems noticeably absent. The session took place during a marathon recording period when Elvis was working to rebuild momentum after his military hiatus. According to drummer DJ Fontana, who played on the session, "We'd been recording for hours at that point. Elvis was tired. We were all tired, but RCA wanted to get as many songs as possible while they had him in the studio." This exhaustion is audible in Elvis's performance on Stay Away. Unlike the passionate delivery on most of the album's tracks, Elvis sounds mechanical on this recording, almost as if he's reading the lyrics for the first time. His phrasing lacks the intuitive musicality that normally characterized his work, and his voice misses the emotional connection that made him such a compelling performer. Guitar player Scotty Moore later recalled, "That was toward the end of a long night. The energy in the room had dipped, and I think Elvis was just ready to wrap things up." This sentiment is reflected in the somewhat lifeless quality of Presley's vocal take, which stands in stark contrast to the fire he brought to other tracks recorded during the same session. Music critic Ernst Jorgensen noted in his detailed study of Elvis's recording sessions that Stay Away was completed with minimal takes and discussion, suggesting Elvis simply wanted to get through the material rather than perfect it. It's one of the few performances from this otherwise stellar session where Elvis seems to be merely fulfilling an obligation rather than expressing himself artistically, Jorgensen wrote. The backing band delivers a competent but uninspired performance as well, perhaps taking their cue from Elvis's apparent disinterest. The result is a track that feels like a formality, a placeholder, among the otherwise vibrant recordings that made Elvis Is Back such a triumphant return for the king. What makes this particular instance of Elvis's disengagement so notable is the contrast with the rest of the album. While most of Elvis Is Back shows an artist reconnecting with his muse after 2 years away, Stay Away offers a brief glimpse of a performer going through the motions, a rare occurrence during what was otherwise a creatively rejuvenated period in his career. Number 3, Do the Clam, from Girl Happy soundtrack, 1965. By the mid-1960s, Elvis Presley's movie career had fallen into a predictable formula: lightweight romantic comedies set in exotic locations, each requiring Elvis to perform songs that often had little musical merit beyond serving the film's plot. Do the Clam, from the 1965 film Girl Happy, represents perhaps the nadir of this trend, and Elvis's vocal performance makes it clear he knew it. The song was written specifically to accompany a beach scene where Elvis teaches a group of bikini-clad girls a new dance called The Clam. With lyrics like, do the clam, grab your barefoot baby by the hand, the song was a far cry from the rock and roll that had established Elvis as a cultural force just a decade earlier. Elvis recorded Do the Clam at Radio Resorters in Hollywood on June 10, 1964. Studio logs indicate that the session was tense, with Elvis reportedly questioning the quality of the material. According to Elvis's friend and Memphis Mafia member Joe Esposito, Elvis came out of the booth after hearing the playback and just rolled his eyes. He knew this stuff wasn't good, but he was trapped in a contract. Elvis's disinterest is evident from the opening notes. His usually dynamic vocal presence sounds flattened with none of the characteristic inflections and emotional flourishes that defined his best work. When he delivers the hook, Do the Clam, there's an almost audible resignation in his voice, the sound of an artist who had once changed the landscape of popular music, reduced to singing about a made-up dance move. Red West, another longtime Elvis associate, who was present at many recording sessions later, recalled, Elvis would sometimes make jokes about the movie songs to break the tension. He'd say things like, Well, this one ain't exactly Don't Be Cruel, is it? The backing track, with its simplistic arrangement and generic beach party sound, compounds the sense that this was product rather than art. Elvis makes minimal effort to elevate the material, seemingly content to get through the recording with as little investment as possible. What makes Do the Clam particularly significant in Elvis's catalog of disengaged performances is how it represents the wider creative crisis he faced during this period. As Priscilla Presley would later write in her memoir, Elvis in May, this era was professionally frustrating for Elvis, who felt trapped by the movie contracts and the soundtracks that went with them. He wanted to record meaningful music, but instead found himself singing about clams and shrimp. Music historian Colin Hescott has noted that while Elvis remained a consummate professional who rarely failed to deliver what was asked of him, there were occasions when his heart clearly wasn't in it. And Do the Clam is perhaps the most obvious example from his movie years. The recording stands as audio evidence of an artist going through the motions, while his passion for music temporarily smoldered beneath the constraints of Hollywood obligations. Number 2. Yoga Is As Yoga Does, from Easy Come, Easy Go soundtrack. 1967. If there was ever a moment where Elvis Presley seemed to acknowledge the absurdity of his movie career to his vocal performance, it came with Yoga Is As Yoga Does, from the 1967 film Easy Come, Easy Go. In the film, Elvis plays a Navy frogman who becomes involved with yoga practitioners, a premise flimsy even by the standards of his movie career. The song, performed as a duet with actress Elsa Lanchester, required Elvis to sing lyrics like, "Yoga is as yoga does, it'll tie you up in knots," while attempting to maintain some semblance of his dignity as an artist. The result is a recording where Elvis sounds not just bored but actively bemused by the material. Recorded at Radio Reciters on September 28, 1966, the session for Yoga Is As Yoga Does was reportedly difficult. According to sound engineer Bill Porter, who worked on many Elvis sessions, there was a point during this particular recording when Elvis just stopped and looked at everyone in the studio like, "Are we really doing this?" Then he laughed and went back to work. That laugh told you everything you needed to know about how he felt. Elvis's vocal performance is revealing in its restraint. Throughout the track, he delivers his lines with a noticeable lack of enthusiasm, occasionally veering into what sounds like barely concealed mockery of the material. When he sings about the benefits of yoga, there's a detachment in his voice that suggests he's mentally elsewhere, perhaps contemplating how far he'd strayed from his rock and roll roots. Particularly telling is the contrast between Elvis's delivery and Elsa Lanchester's enthusiastic performance. While Lanchester embraces the camp quality of the song, Elvis sounds like he's reading his lines at a table read, rather than delivering a fully committed vocal performance. Marty Lacker, another member of Elvis's inner circle, later recalled, Elvis came out of the studio after they finished that yoga song and said, "If the Beatles could see me now." He was embarrassed by some of this stuff, but he was a professional and did what was asked of him. The backing track, with its cartoonish, Eastern music motifs and exaggerated exotic sounds, only emphasizes the song's status as a novelty number. Elvis makes little attempt to inject life into this musical caricature, instead delivering what might be described as the vocal equivalent of a resigned shrug. What makes this recording particularly significant is that it came at a time when Elvis was increasingly aware of the artistic heights being reached by contemporaries like the Beatles and Bob Dylan. As Peter Brown, one of Elvis's band members during this period, later noted, Elvis would listen to Sgt. Pepper and then have to go record songs about yoga. He knew the score. You could hear it in his voice on some of these movie tracks. Yoga Is As Yoga Does stands as perhaps the most blatant example of Elvis's creative dissatisfaction during his Hollywood years. a performance where his boredom and frustration with the material are barely concealed beneath a thin veneer of professionalism. Number 1. Are You Sincere? From Moody Blue Sessions, 1976. The most poignant instance of Elvis sounding disengaged comes from one of his final recording sessions. In October 1976, less than a year before his death, an exhausted and unwell Elvis was recording material in the makeshift studio set up in the Jungle Room at Graceland. Among the songs captured during this session was Are You Sincere?, a Wayne Walker composition that Elvis approached with audible weariness. By this point in his life, Elvis was struggling with numerous health issues, prescription drug dependency, and the emotional toll of his personal problems. These sessions, engineered by RCA using their mobile recording equipment, were arranged at Graceland because Elvis had become reluctant to travel to professional studios. Are You Sincere? Reveals an Elvis who sounds not just bored, but utterly depleted. His once magnificent voice, which could shift from tender vulnerability to raw power within a single phrase, sounds hollow and detached. The vibrant baritone that had defined American popular music for 2 decades had faded to a shadow of itself. David Briggs, who played keyboard on the session, later recalled, Elvis wasn't in good shape during those Jungle Room sessions. Some days were better than others, but when we recorded Are You Sincere, he was really struggling. He'd rally for certain songs, but on that one you can hear that he just didn't have much left to give. Throughout the recording, Elvis sounds as though he's struggling to maintain focus. His phrasing, once so instinctively perfect, comes across as labored. Notes that the younger Elvis would have held with strength and conviction are cut short or wobble uncertainly. Most telling is the emotional disconnect. The song's lyrics about questioning a lover's honesty are delivered with minimal investment, as though Elvis is simply going through familiar motions. Guitarist James Burton, who had played with Elvis since his 1969 comeback, noted that during those last sessions, there were times when Elvis would just seem to drift away mentally in the middle of a take. You'd see him staring off and his voice would kind of go on autopilot. It was hard to watch. Producer Felton Jarvis made valiant attempts to enhance the recording with overdubs and processing, but nothing could disguise the fundamental listlessness in Elvis's performance. What makes this recording particularly heartbreaking is that it captures a once towering artist at his most diminished, not just bored with the material, but perhaps with performance itself. Music journalist Alana Nash, in her book, The Colonel, observed that these final recordings reveal an artist going through professional motions while his personal world was collapsing around him. The disconnection audible in Are You Sincere? Isn't merely artistic disinterest. It's the sound of a man whose legendary passion for music had been extinguished by years of poor management, artistic compromise, and personal struggles. Unlike the movie songs where Elvis's boredom seemed to stem from frustration with subpar material, Are You Sincere? Captures something more profound, the sound of an artist who had given everything he had to his music and had little left to offer. It stands as a somber bookend to a career that began with such unbridled enthusiasm and revolutionary energy. The contrast between this performance and Elvis's electrifying early work is stark and poignant. The young Elvis, who had recorded That's All Right, Mama, with such joy and spontaneity in 1954, seems worlds away from the man heard on Are You Sincere?, whose voice carries the weight of 23 years of stardom struggle and increasingly rare artistic satisfaction. While casual listeners might not immediately place Are You Sincere among Elvis's most notable recordings, for those studying the full arc of his career, it provides crucial insight into his final chapter, a document of a legendary voice in its twilight, going through the motions one last time. will we ever truly understand what was going through Elvis's mind during these moments of apparent disengagement? Is there something revealing about an artist of Elvis's stature in these rare instances when the mask of professional excellence momentarily slipped?